The first portable consumer tape recorders were really just home devices, but with a good strong handle on the case, which meant you could lug them to a different location, but you'd still need to plug them into a mains power supply when you got there. Over the years, technology brought smaller battery-powered open reel recorders, but within a few years most tape recorder manufacturers moved across to the more convenient compact cassette system that Philips introduced in the early 1960s. But while Philips had been working on shrinking reel-to-reel tapes into an easy-to-use cartridge system, over in Japan, Sanyo had been doing the very same thing, but had come up with a very different solution. This is the Sanyo MicroPack 35, a largely forgotten format nowadays. However, who knows, if Philips hadn't developed that compact cassette, perhaps the Sony Walkman would have had one of these inside. You can see we've got a stacked reel arrangement in here, and the tape is running between them in a diagonal motion, and it's a two-sided cartridge. And the device that uses it is this thing here. Now, it's in its carrying case at the moment, a nice natty leather case with a little holder there for the microphone and earphone, but I'll get it out of the case and show you around it. Now, this is a beautiful and well-constructed device, reassuringly heavy. It's all metal. The black section you see is just a vinyl coating on top of the metal frame. The cartridge goes in from the bottom here, and you get about 20 minutes on each side of that. Once you've used one side, flip it over, and you can use the other one. The controls are all on the top. Metal controls again, lovely positive movements. It's a joy to operate this device. We've got rewind, stop, play and record. There's no fast forward on here. Turning this control on the top feels a little bit like turning the ignition key on a car. On the front of the machine we've got a speaker on the right hand side, which is mirrored by the tape cartridge window on the left. Volume control up here as well, and to the right of that a speed control, so that will vary the amount that the machine can record on one tape. At the fast speed it'll be better quality, but you'll get less on one cartridge. You can see on the front of the cartridge here there's numbers 5 up to 20 indicating the amount of tape that you've used. On the top left of the machine there's a VU meter which operates when it's recording. When the machine is playing, it functions as a battery meter. The microphone is external and it's plugged into this 3.5mm mono mini jack input on the side, which is next to the earphone output, and that in turn is above the battery compartment, and inside here you'll find the device powered by 4 AA's. And due to the lack of plastics used in its construction, it does have quite some weight to it. On the back there's an input for an external power supply, which could also be used to charge up an optional NiCad battery pack. And in the back of the cartridge compartment you'll find some instructions that advise you to regularly clean the record head in order to maintain the best audio quality. And speaking of heads, you'll notice the tape goes in a diagonal direction in the cartridge, so of course the record and erase head are also in that diagonal orientation inside the machine. Incidentally, that white square on the right hand side, that's a bit of felt that rubs across the top of the tape in order to clean off any dust or debris. The cartridges slide into the machine very easily, but they also don't fall out of it. And that's a very simple system of just having a leaf spring on the left hand side which pushes against the cartridge and holds it in position. Now, the drive mechanism on this is very unusual. If you look towards the centre of the image, you can see as I move the transport controls between the rewind and play positions, the entire motor itself shifts on an axis. Now compare that to a traditional cassette recorder. The metal pole you see here is the capstan. That's attached to the motor. So the metal pole is spinning, and when the pinch roller is brought into it, that then spins. The tape runs between those two items. If I press pause, the pinch roller moves off the capstan just a fraction so that it doesn't spin. But the capstan continues spinning throughout, and the pinch roller is just brought in towards it so that it can then pull the tape through. But on the MicroPack system, it's the capstan itself that moves. So this is spinning just like it was on the previous device, but it's being brought into contact with something. That thing that it's touching is held inside the cartridge itself. If you look between the two reels here, you can see they've both got a black rubber mat on them, a circular mat. And that is what the capstan touches to drive the reels around. So it goes in through this hole on the side of the cartridge here. And as you move it into position, it'll either touch the bottom reel or the top reel, depending on whether you're playing or rewinding. And there's a further additional hole on the bottom of the cartridge which operates a braking mechanism. The reels are held in a locked position until this is pushed in and then they're released. The device that pushes it in is activated at the same time the machine is moved into either the rewind or play positions, and that rod also helps to hold the cartridge in position so that it can't be removed until the device is switched off. This machine also has an auto stop function which is activated by the circular metal object you see towards the centre of the image. At the end of the tape there's a section of metal foil which goes across that sensor, completes a circuit and stops the reels from turning. Now if you take the cartridge out and flip it over to play the other side, of course that metal foil is still connecting across that auto stop mechanism. So to override it you press this button on the left and that enables the machine to carry on playing the rest of the tape. Unsurprisingly, for a device that's over 50 years old, it's struggling to play the cartridge that I got with it. And it isn't down to the machine, it's down to the rubber mats that are inside the cartridge. Over that period of time, they've hardened up. They no longer have the grippy surface they once had, which means the capstan is just slipping on them. Now, of course, as everyone does, I've got some rubber roller restorer in the house, and that would have gone some way towards improving the tackiness on those rubber mats. If only I could have got to them. They're so closely sandwiched together I can't even get a cotton bud in here, and unfortunately the cartridges can't be disassembled because they've been glued together. Opening them up would involve just snapping them in half and then they wouldn't work at all. So I needed to come up with a solution that attacked things from the other end, from the capstan end, and the best thing that I could come up with was using some heat shrink tubing, the stuff that you'd normally put around electrical wires. On this occasion I'm shrinking it down, making it nice and smooth, so I've got a rubberized coating on here. Of course, increasing the size of the capstan means that the cartridges are going to play a little bit fast, but that isn't going to be of any concern because of course this device has a speed control. So now I can finally play back the cartridge that came with this, and I imported this device from Japan and the cartridge was of course recorded there, so we'll have a brief listen to this and see what's on it. Now, I don't understand Japanese at all, but to my ears this tape sounds like it contains a recording of a trip somewhere, perhaps a sightseeing tour, and someone's announcing different sites as they go past them, but I'm not entirely sure. If you understand Japanese and you want to decipher this, well, I'll have a link to an MP3 of this tape in the video description text box. If this was used to record a trip somewhere, then it's not entirely surprising. At the time this machine came out, tape recorders were being advertised as cameras of sound. This one even looks a lot like a camera, minus the lens of course, but we've got that black and silver motif. The buttons on the top, that one on the right even looks a little bit like a shutter button, and of course leather straps at either corner. Now if the phrase camera of sound rings a bell, it's because I first mentioned it in my video about the wire recorders, and you can see this article from the end of World War II where they called it the civilian camera of sound, suggesting that you'd record baby's first words, famous sounds like Niagara Falls and Old Faithful and the President's voice. But even 20 years later, when tape recorders were becoming more common, they were still being advertised as sound cameras by some companies, and possible uses that they could be put to were for recording business meetings, taking inventory, again children's first words, school lectures, sending letters to people on tapes. Recording music on them was a distant second place. And in 1963, when the US company Channel Master decided they wanted to diversify it to being a consumer electronics company, they wanted to get in on this sound camera game, but rather than make their own, they decided just to rebadge Sanyo's equipment and bring it to the US as the Channel Master 6546. Now this machine is identical to the Japanese model, well, with one exception, and that's the instructions are all in English, which is how I was able to understand what the labels meant on the Japanese model that I showed you earlier on. And I've even been able to find a blank Channel Master tape cartridge, model number 6595. So this is unused, new old stock, so I'm going to use this to record on. And fortunately, with the American model of this machine that I got, it also came with the microphone. The Japanese one, this was missing. So I've now got the official microphone. As you can see, it's a beautiful object as well. full metal body on here. It's got quite a bit of weight to it. You probably couldn't hang it off a shirt, but it's got a clip on there. You could perhaps put it onto a jacket lapel, and that's a rotating clip as well. It's just a beautifully made little device, and we've got the 2.5mm mini jack on the end here. So after making my capstan modification to this machine, I'm now able to make some period appropriate recordings. To make a recording, you turn the dial to the bottom and then lift it slightly to get it into the record position. The battery meter then becomes a VU meter, as you can see when I speak into this microphone.
Mic check 1 2. Testing, testing, testing.
There were no pre-recorded tapes released on this format, and nowadays when we think of cassettes we immediately associate them with music. But back when the Philips compact cassette and this Sanyo Micro 35 system were first introduced in the early 1960s, they were sold more as general purpose audio recorders. In this article from a 1966 edition of Popular Science, they've rounded up 17 of the most popular portable tape machines that were available. There are a number of open reel devices. There are 2 using the new Philips compact cassette. And then there's one machine that's quite a bit smaller than the rest, branded as a Westinghouse H29R1, but really it's the Sanyo Micropack 35 system again. You'll notice the speed of playback isn't consistent, and this is known as wow and flutter. And whilst it's been exacerbated by the hardened rubber on the tape reels, even when this device was new, it didn't perform well in this area. Fortunately, wow and flutter was one of the things that was on the comparison chart when Popular Science reviewed this device back in 1966, so we can see how it directly compares against the Philips compact cassette machines of the same era. Now, I've marked the 2 cassette models in blue, the Micropack 35 is in red. Now, these are all manufacturer's specs, so you've got to take them with a bit of a pinch of salt. For example, in the reviews, they say that the cassette models seem to be identical, just with different labels on them, but looking at the specs, they seem to vary between them a little bit. But if we look at the Micropack 35, the far right column, 1.0 wow and flutter, that's worse than all the other devices on test. And if we go to the frequency response column, you can see again the Micropack 35 has the worst frequency response range of all the models being tested as well. Now, the reviewers at the time attributed the poor speed consistency to the motor drive mechanism, which is the same thing I was having problems with earlier on. However, at the time it probably didn't matter too much because, again, you weren't recording music with these things. At the top right here, you can use them to tape Junior's first words, to terrorise guests at your next party, and to send voice letters to anyone else who owns a tape recorder. Now, music was on the cards, though, by this point. They were testing it out, and they were surprised by how well the Philips compact cassette played music. You can see here they're pretty impressed with it, and it does indicate a sign of things to come with the cassettes. Of course, cassettes didn't really take off for music until well into the 70s, but they suggested here that many other manufacturers have announced plans to build similar machines that use this cartridge, as they called it at the time. But just because a format isn't suited for a particular task doesn't mean you wouldn't use it for that. I know if I'd have had one of these when I was younger, I'd have been holding that microphone up to the radio to record the top 20 countdown, and it looks like I wouldn't have been alone. The thing that really fascinates me about the Micro 35 system is how it was being developed at the same time as Philips compact cassette on the other side of the world. They've clearly got no link to each other. They're both working on the same problem, how to make a more convenient version of a reel-to-reel tape. Sanyo came out with this and Philips came out with that, and it's clear that neither of them have influenced each other in any way. They've just gone off in completely different tangents. And while the Philips compact cassette was undoubtedly the better solution, I don't want to take anything away from the beautiful machine that Sanyo created to play their cartridges. It really is second to none when it comes to the quality of construction, and it's full of neat and well thought out touches. It would have been the smaller recorder by quite some margin, as those first Philips cassette portables used 5 C-cell batteries, and besides which they didn't have a speed control which could make your voice sound a little bit like Jeremy Clarkson.
Right, so I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Sanyo Micropack 35, but that's it for the moment. As always,